Better. Alright. I'm gonna try making a weird little dungeon. Um, Out of this. Alright. I'm gonna try making a weird little dungeon. Out of this. We're gonna try again. I'm gonna make a dungeon. Okay, so I'm working on this tool that is tentatively called Dungeon Generating. And what it does is it takes Magic the Gathering cards and turns them into a dungeon that can be used in an RPG campaign. That's the dream, at least. It's currently very in progress, but I want to make something, and so I thought I would do that and also stream it. So, as some people know, I'm moving, and I recently packed all my Magic cards, so I ran out to my local shop to grab a deck, and grabbed this commander deck that is this person. The foiling on it makes it really hard to see. Much easier to see actual cards. So I've removed all of the lands, all the lands and all of the land enchantments, because I haven't really figured out what to do with land enchantments yet. This is version 0.1, and there's many magic keywords in the history of Magic that I have not yet fully finalized the translation of. But enchanting lands is one of those. But in the future, the plan is to figure out how to incorporate as many of the keywords and mechanics as possible. So I've moved all the lands and all the enchanted lands, and have whatever's left over. I am going to build this for a game group that I am currently running a game with, which might spoil it for some folks. But I think it'll be fine. Maybe I'll just I'm going to try and build a couple rooms. Maybe we won't build a whole dungeon. But I think the first step is probably to go through. Just gonna go through these cards and find things that are lower level. So the guideline in the tool at the moment is to say that you want your casting cost to be within a couple levels of your adventurers, because casting cost is kind of generically an indicator of power of the card, and so you don't want to have an 8 CMC card against a group of first level, but probably it'll get too powerful, because what the generator advises is to use the relative power and toughness and also abilities, and then translate those into things like hit dice and hit points, and attacks with special abilities and stuff. And so once you get up to those really expensive Magic cards, you're going to end up having too many abilities and really huge toughnesses and whatever. So I know this is a low level party, so I'm going to go through these cards and kind of just remove everything that doesn't really fit, or that feels like it might be a little too powerful. So what's interesting about this, I picked up this is a commander precon, right? I picked this up, and the main commander I think is actually a really bad example of this tool, but it's actually it's fun to me to figure out how do we make it work. Because I have vigilance is something I figured have a loose idea of, but you don't have a library necessarily, and you're not really casting things, you're using the cards to generate a dungeon. So I actually think that luckily this is a 4 CMC card, right? It costs 4 up here for those of you who are not Magic users. So I think it's going to be way too difficult for them anyway. This is going to get hard. We'll talk about once what things translate into once I've kind of built my loose dungeon deck. The backup commander, also mega powerful, so I think is also going to get removed instantly from this. Those two gone. This one is my current example in the document that is linked down there, and I think actually is pretty cool, and is pretty okay power for where we're at, although could get pretty powerful if left to their own devices. So we'll keep that in. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we'll look at some of them. Seems probably fine. Destroy is one that I'm still working on, because Destroy is obviously a huge part of Magic the Gathering. Sorry that my camera keeps refocusing. Destroy is a huge part of Magic the Gathering, but obviously you can't just have anything destroy in a dungeon, in an RPG. That'd be rude. You can't just be like, yeah, your character's dead, whatever. We're not like that here. Fleece Mainline, great card, very powerful. Maybe we'll keep it in just for fun. That's fine. This, too much. That's actually kind of fun. So I'm going to keep that in. That's also kind of fun, so I'm going to keep that in. Realm Cloak Giant, way too powerful. Nothing 7/7. So I'm just going to go through. Okay, 2, great. Here, we'll make a little pile. Yes, I didn't sleeve them. Who knows? What a rudeness. What a magic rudeness. 3 and below here. 3 and above here. Too much. Equipments are going to get fun. I think that artifacts are kind of like the heart of how this will end up working out, because they kind of are so varied, but also like have a lot of flavor that can translate into something that might be a cool dungeon artifact, right? Like dungeons are full of, and I mean, we use dungeon loosely. It could be a forest dwell, whatever, but still, obviously equipment can be things like loot. I think artifacts will also be a lot of loot, which is part of why I think they're a fun inclusion. Obviously everybody wants to go for creatures. This is really interesting because these cards are from Forgotten Realms, which means there's a bunch of them that roll dice, which is like, great, good, yeah, I'm going to do that anyway because we're playing an RPG. Draw X cards, though, kind of useless. I have an idea of how I want to translate X cards, but drawing cards, not super useful. Good old Soul Ring. Enchantments, so pricey. Great, so I have removed everything that costs more than 3, all the land and all the land enchantments. And then we're just going to, so now I have like a functioning dungeon deck. It's going to be random. I haven't read all these cards. I don't know what they do. I'm going to shuffle them up. I probably should have sleeved them, but again, my sleeves are packed, so we're just going to be nice about them. Also, they're just an example. And then we'll get into starting to make rooms and how that happens. I think it's probably going to be pretty chaotic, but anybody who's played an RPG with me knows that that's my entire jam. So as far as the other step that is included in building decks is like picking how many cards you want. I'm just culling them from an already pre-generated deck, but a good rule is 5 per room. We're going to be rolling a d6 every time we generate a room to determine how many cards we're going to draw, and then we're going to group those cards and kind of translate them all into something that we can use in some kind of RPG. You want to have like a couple extra, like in theory you could just keep rolling 6s, and then by the time you get to the end, if I'm making a 10-room dungeon, and so I have 50 cards, and then I roll a 6 all the way through, and now the end of my dungeon is empty. And so you generally add some extra cards in there at the end, or just like embrace that and be like, for whatever reason, the deeper you went into this dungeon, things just got cleared out, and use that as its own prompt. I think the whole point of these kinds of tools is finding something that makes a cool story, and sometimes kind of those chance moments that are pretty rare, that might be very against the formula of what we kind of anticipate like an RPG dungeon to be. is where all the fun happens. So like, sure, yeah, you get to the end and there's just 3 empty rooms. The context of those 3 empty rooms for me would be like, what else is in the rest of the rooms, right? Like what story are we adding to what came before? All right, we're pretty shuffled. This might go horribly wrong anyway, but here we are. So we have a deck. I have a note-taking app, and I have a single die. So 4. So I'm going to draw 4 cards for our first room. Great. 2 creatures. That's not so bad. And some weird stuff to do them. So some of the things obviously are going to get ignored, right? Like some things are not going to get translated one-to-one easily. But I think that's probably like a fun moment to think about how you use whatever you can't use as like narrative and flavor additions. And so Enter the Battlefield, I'm kind of loosely treating like, because many cards in History of Magic have Enter the Battlefield effects, right? And so I'm kind of loosely treating those as options for something that creature could do on their first round of play. So if we get into a battle with this like Knight of Autumn here, and it says, choose one, either put 2+1/+1 counters on it, so buff it, or destroy target artifact or enchantment. If there was there is actually an enchantment, but it's going to be on us, so we don't want to do that. If there was an artifact in the room that was maybe a trap, that might be a cool thing. You gain 4 life. Life, I'm kind of translating 1-to-1, right? So effects that let you gain 4 life, I'm just going to be like, great, somebody in the room gets 4 hit points. That might be the other creature, that might be this creature. As a like first round thing, probably not super useful, but if I was going to say, I've made, this is room number 1, this creature is available to this room, and maybe they don't show up instantly. Maybe they're not just hanging out in there. They're like hanging out down the hall, and my intention is that when the players enter there, it's going to appear. And maybe that happens after the other creature that's in there has already taken some battle, so they show up and heal them, whatever. You get it. You understand. So I'm going to start taking some notes here. So we have the Knight of Autumn, which I might give another name, but room number 1 has 2 creatures. Knight of Autumn. Okay, so first translations, we want the hit points. We want its attack, and we want its armor class, right? And so the way that, we'll just focus on this guy for a moment. The way that I've decided to do that, and it kind of is by reading a number of numbers on the card, a number of different ways. And so we have the casting cost, and the casting cost is going to be our loose hit points. And our hit dice, right? So we have the Knight of Autumn, and for each colored mana source that it requires, which are those symbols, the non-numbered symbols, we're going to move along the dice chain. And so the dice chain goes D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D20. You could use the DCC dice if you wanted to. That might make it really interesting, but it would make it harder for things. If you wanted things to get a lot easier, you could use the DCC dice chain because it has more steps in it. It has all the weird in-between dice, but for this, we're just going to use the default one. So for each of those, you move 1 step along the dice chain. You're starting at D4, so there's 2 of them, so we're at D6. And then the number adds a number of dice to the hit dice, right? So start at 1d4. There's an extra symbol. You're at 1d6. There's an extra dice in that colorless mana. You're at 2d6. So probably, and I would just roll these at some point or take the average to get their actual hit points, right? And then we have their base attack. So like, do they have something cool? Yeah, they have this weird little like spiky staff. It looks like a weird staff, right? I don't know. Cool staff. And how we do attack in this is we're going to take that power and we're going to again read it 2 ways. So it's going to be a straight translation as the roll to hit, right? So it's going to be at +2. And it, again, is going to use that dice chain. So it's 2 steps in. So you have your first step, which is D4, and your second step, which is D6. So it is going to do a D6. You're going to see how weird my keyboard is, and how incapable I am of typing on it. Cool staff, +2, D6 damage. Pretty okay for a first level, like a low-level dungeon opponent. And then its armor class, we're just taking that toughness and adding it to 10. Creature the first, complete. Now, we have a second creature that we can translate, right? So he's going to have the same hit dice, because there's 2 symbols and 1 extra dice in there. Is it appropriate attack? I feel like it's just like I'm upsetting in the face, and that is going to damage you. But let's just make like a little bite or whatever. And the bite is very weak. It's just a +1 D4 damage, AC 11. Now, those are like pretty chill bad guys. But where this gets kind of interesting or fun, like we could go with this and that could be fine. I have enough of character, I have some flavor text, especially this one. How I fit this into a dungeon. This is starting to give me some flavor for what the dungeon might be if I didn't have that in mind already. So like conveniently, the players in the game that I want to run this for are going to be coming from the water. So this is kind of like a good entrance creature. Yeah, and how that fits in with our dear knight, who knows? Maybe that's going to be a weird little... maybe we translate that image. Again, we don't have to do that, but maybe we translate that image to be like, great, I'm going to make this actually like a seahorse that you're riding. We're going to do a little bit of like a mermaid situation. Or maybe that is that entrance later on. But then, so we have these 2 creatures. That's fun. But then we have 2 other things, right? We have an aura enchantment and an instant. And the way that I have been translating instants is as something that can happen once, right? Like an effect that can happen once during combat. So this is actually just like a feature that I'm going to write down and take note of in my dungeon to say, like, once we enter combat, once the players enter there, once something is going to trigger this moment where something here could happen, right? Again, destroy target artifact. Got to figure out what to do with destroys. I think I had it's the like big question mark. So if you have an idea, if you're watching this and you have an idea for what destroy could translate to in like a generic RPG system, because this whole thing is kind of based on like a pretty, like trying to be universal to most D20 systems. And so what destroy could be is kind of interesting. Maybe it's like a save effect. Maybe it is like destroy target artifact to me is like, great, roll a save versus like having a piece of equipment that a character is carrying break. Put target creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Again, very unique to Magic, probably not super great. Counter target instant spell. See, that's kind of fun because countering for me, I've decided that I think countering can be fun as like a imposed disadvantage on something, right? So if I take those 2, if I took the destroy target artifact and counter target instant spell, I can have 2 kind of options for something that I want to do to change either combat in the space or actually just change the environment when the characters are in there. And then I have to figure out some interesting narrative behind that, right? Like, what is causing this? What is making these things happen? And I have not figured out any of that yet. Also, some of this might come retroactively. What has been interesting when I've been doing tests with this is that the it's not until I get a couple rooms in that I start to get like a bunch of flavor or ideas or whatever, and then I can go back and be like, oh, see, now I know why that creature's there. Now I know what might cause this effect. I might do some like foreshadowing or whatever. So we have these room effects. Optionally, save versus equipment break, or great. So these are things that I know I can have access to at some point. These are like later things, right? So that card's done. These are later. I have these activities. They could be things that like the creatures in the room themselves are casting. If I wanted to make a creature, like if I wanted to make our Selkie like a spellcaster or whatever, I could be like, great. So at some point, the Selkie can impose disadvantage on one of the player characters. But then we have this aura, and what this is going to do is change one of these creatures, right? So I'm going to take this and be like, which one do I want to add this to? Probably the knight. I think that's kind of cool. And all of a sudden that knight becomes this knight. Is flying, and that's cool, and that changes a lot of stuff, right? So by default, obviously we know that means like it is flying, it gets some kind of fly speed, but also I think that changes its cool staff to be a ranged attack. Like to me, it doesn't make sense to make a creature that's flying about a bunch but doesn't have some kind of ranged attack, and so I would probably be like, I don't know, cool staff, energy ray. So all of a sudden it's like, nah, you're not hitting me with a staff, you're gonna like use some kind of magical effect, and all of a sudden that creature, even though it's still like, if you can hit it, it's pretty easy to hit, it won't end up with a lot of hit points, probably. It's probably going to end up, somewhere around 6, maybe 7. So as long as you can hit it, I don't doubt that the players have a chance to take it out, but also it has this like more interesting quality about it. Again, draw a card, enters the battlefield, draw a card. What I might do with card draw effects is to have them be like, you get an extra card for that room, right? Card draw effects could happen right now in this phase, and all of a sudden that room gets buffed, especially if it's something like this where it's only going to happen once. Like figuring out what card draw means in when you're live playing these things is kind of interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting to potentially keep the deck active and present when you're running the dungeon, and if you have leftover cards from your dungeon, to pull another card, and maybe that totally changes the tide of activity in your dungeon. And so it's like, okay, this is now being read not as a one-time enchantment. This is being read as like a feature, right? This is like some bigger, larger enchantment of this character, and that enchantment might in turn allow me 1 extra card. So if we go with that, we'll just go with that for now. We get 1 extra card for this. Great. Robe of Stars. Look at how cool that robe is. I'm so glad we got an equipment. I think equipments are going to be cool. So this is a loot. This is clearly loot. Look at how cool it is. Who doesn't want to get the Robe of Stars? It can either be, obviously up to anybody who's doing this, it can either be a loot that's just sitting in the room, and that's fun, or it could be a loot that's sitting on a creature, and when you defeat that creature, you get it, right? So I think probably like the Night of Autumn has already been like a little buffed by that enchantment, and so if I was going to give it to one of them, I'd probably give it to the Selkie. And also kind of like, there's just a vibe. There's a vibe there, right? Like creepy Selkie, Robe of Stars. It's cool. oceans sometimes look like skies. Like we're already getting into some like flavor about like what maybe the water that the characters are like coming from starts to look like, and maybe it's an open cavern and kind of like that boundary between where the water's edge is, and all of a sudden, you know, like the cavern is big enough and that boundary where it becomes the walls isn't clear because there's like sparkly effects. Whatever, we're getting there, right? We are like making a picture. And then all of a sudden this creature becomes pretty cool. So if we think, okay, the Robostars is a piece of gear that is going on the Selkie, our Selkie's AC instantly goes up, making them pretty tough for a low-level dungeon. And then they have this activated effect they can do. Equipped creature phases out. Rad. Phases out is so rare. Or at least it's pretty rare in my exposure to Magic the Gathering. And so it actually being like a keyword or an ability that exists is probably not going to come up a bunch. But it's still cool and very easy. Like, it's still a cool ability to think about narrating in the context of a game. So now all of a sudden this Selkie has like an ability. And that ability, so the way that we translate when using this tool is that ability is something. There was a version of D&D that had a recharge effect. I think actually probably there's multiple versions where it has like an ability needs to be recharged. And so that's kind of a mechanic that I think is very helpful here. So it costs 2 in Magic to do this. But it's repeatable, right? It's a repeatable thing that you can pay. Phases out, we're gonna take phases out literally, right? Like the creature becomes, we could go for invisibility if we wanted to, or we could go for like it's going to a different plane of existence. It's just not even here. Probably in a low level dungeon, those are effectively the same. You're not gonna have a lot that like sees through invisibility or that can like follow it into another plane. Yes, technically one of those is probably harder than the other, but we're just going to like phase out, and it's going to recharge on a 2 or higher. So keyboard, help me out. And what I kind of, what the recharge mechanic means is that like it costs 2, so it recharges at 2 and above. Which means that every turn that this creature has, you're going to roll a d6, and on a roll of 2 or higher, d6, I think it's a d6, you're going to roll a d6, and on a 2 or higher, it recharges. Now, for something like this, that's going to be pretty frequently, and that might become a problem if the activated ability costs more than 6, because there are for sure a lot of those. And so I feel like probably the math of how this has to translate if it was going to get used for higher level dungeons would have to be adjusted, right? If it costs 8, we're not rolling a d6. You're going to start rolling a d10 or a d8 at that point. And maybe that means it should be recharge actually is like roll the closest but lowest die. So like we're rolling a d4 to get a 2, and then if it's a recharge, I don't know, 6, then it's like you're gonna roll a d6. If it's a 5, you're gonna still roll a d6 or whatever. But this is kind of like the simplest way I could think to translate those into something that is repeatable and this activated ability. So phase out, and then probably I'm gonna write something recharge 2. We'll go with invisible for now. And then that can be the action that this creature takes when it is their turn. Not like, oh, they can just do it as much as they want, but like it's their action when you're in some kind of turn order, depending on what system it is that you are translating this into. Cool. So that's room 1. We have 2 cool creatures. They actually do like kind of cool stuff. We have a Robe of Stars that is a cool piece of loot that probably is going to grant, this is also one of those things where it's like, how willing are you to adjust the system that you're playing in to this? Because Robe of Stars to me is probably like, in something like D&D, super easy to be like, it grants invisibility sometimes because there's lots of treasure that already kind of does that. If you want to take something like the recharge mechanic and just give that to your players to play with, then it's like, great, grants phase out as above, right? Which means that players then are rolling that. Roll a d6, get above 2, can you phase out? Which might mean they're invisible all the damn time, and that might make them really powerful in this circumstance, but great, good. Let them be mega powerful. Embrace the chaos. That's room number 1. So we put those cards in some kind of discard pile somewhere. We roll again. We see what the next room's going to be. And to be honest, that might like... At some point, I'm going to have to like draw a map of this if I'm playing a game that wants a map. And there's no current, like, that's all choice. That's all just choice. It would be kind of cool to think about a way to take even more information from these cards to like make the visual, make the map. This is like what I think is... What really excites me about this is like, I like taking all of this limited information. There's like only a few different sections that you can get information from a Magic card from, and trying to like direct translate as much as you can, right? So maybe there's something about type line, maybe there's something about rarity. Rarity would probably be really interesting. That's probably something like I would look at rarity for if I was trying to develop a loot pile, like in our last room. I'm using a commander deck, so I don't know if anybody has experience with commander decks, there's just like a lot of rares. They're just like full of rares. But like 3 of the cards we pulled are rare. No mythics, an uncommon, and a common. And that to me would say like, great. The Knight of Almond, very different Knight of Almond. The Knight of Almond and the Cold-Eyed Selkie are rare, and therefore they probably have like not bad loot on them, right? I'm going to put them at like a higher tier of loot because they are rare creatures. But let's do another room. You can't see that. I rolled a 6. It's going to be a big room. The second room is going to become quite large. Let's get rid of these so we can see these cards. Cool. Hexproof. Love it. A useless thing that I should have taken out, but we'll figure it out. Cool. This is some cool stuff. This is some extra cool stuff. This is going to get hard. This room's going to get hard because there's only 1 creature. So let's just ignore this for a second because, again, who knows what you do with search your library for a forest card, put that card on the battlefield, and then shuffle. I think that's probably a throwaway card. That should be removed in the deck building phase. But I got to figure out something. Like I have if you tap for mana, or if a creature can generate mana, then I'm just translating mana 1 for 1 point of hit point health, right? Like mana is a resource that we use in Magic, and so like thinking about how it can be like an energy resource in a dungeon is like, great, good, yeah, it's going to be a heal effect of some variety, even though there are also obviously heal effects within Magic. But I think that's the easiest way to do that. But as far as like what an actual land card would work, I don't know. So we're going to get rid of that for the time being and see what that 6th card is. Good, great. Caddy Breeze, so rad. This is like some real loop, some thematic loop happening because apparently, right? So these are like the Forgotten Realms commander decks, which is wizards, magic people translating Dungeons and Dragons things into Magic relative cards and mechanics. And so Catti-brie, I'm not familiar with the lore, but Catti-brie is a Dungeons and Dragons character, I guess, that now has a Magic the Gathering card. And I'm like, great, how do I translate this back into a dungeon, in a character in a dungeon to play a different RPG that may or may not be Dungeons and Dragons? Whatever. But here we go. It's good. There's another creature. This was gonna be when it was just the Paradise Druid, and all of this stuff was gonna be. I was like, this is a mini boss, right? This character is gonna end up with so many abilities and being so tough. It's still probably a mini boss because Catti-brie's tough in and of themselves, but like, this is the room that kills the whole party, probably, but we'll get there. So Paradise Druid has hexproof as long as it's untapped. Hexproof is a keyword that I have a straight translation for, which means that they just have spell resistance, right? So whatever that translates to in your system, it might be disadvantage on spell effects, it might be like reduced damage from spell damage, whatever. They have spell resistance, probably not hugely. So like the game that I'm running through a dungeon in the not too distant future, we're playing DCC, and there aren't a lot of spells that you get to cast in that, so like it might not come up a whole lot, but good to know. Add 1 mana of any color means that they can take their turn action to heal 1 point of hit point damage, right? So let's start with the base. We'll start at the base. Druid. Hit dice. 2d4. Attack. They don't look very attacky. We're just gonna go for the moment. Attack is going to be +2 d5, d6 damage, AC 11, right? They can heal 1 point. Great. Catti-brie I've actually translated before. So I'm just going to go... Not so many hit points. Just a single d6 with a bow, obviously. First strike, reach. Reach is interesting because there's a bow, so it's already ranged, so those two kind of like cancel each other out in the context of something that would be like on a grid type of combat. Bow +2 d6 damage. Whenever Catti-brie attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each equipment attached to it. Well, we gotta give her equipment. We can have more than one, actually. We're going full mini boss. Remove all +1/+1 counters. This is a thing. This is super funny because I have already. So forgot about AC. AC 12. This is one of those things that would like never come up in a normal game, which is great. It's part of what I like about this potential. Also, notion is weird. On attack, +1/+1. Which gets bananas, right? We're talking about increasing both the damage die, the to hit, and the armor class of this every time they attack. Now, it's cool because she's pretty low at the moment, but this might get way out of hand. But it's only per equipment, right? So this is one of those things where like if we happen to draw an equipment card for her, then great. This is only going to apply if we had drawn equipment. If these were gone, she would just be a 2/2. Like it would end here. It would just be like hit die d6 +2 archer d12. Totally boring because none of the rest of that would apply anymore. Because we have these, we can make our mini boss. Double strike, bananas. Great, good. Deals combat damage. You may place an aura card from your hand to the battlefield attached to it. We're just going to ignore that. +2/+2 trample lifelink. Bananas. Should we do that? I feel like we should do that. So we're going to give this little sword to the druid. We're going to give this behemoth sledge, which in my mind now, like narratively, this has become like you shoot arrows that are tiny hammers. And so buff becomes activated, and then I already did this. Right? On attack, gets +1/+1 because there's equipment attached to her, and then she can, as an alternate action, remove all those buffs and add as a buff to her damage roll. In addition to that, she's no longer, we're looking at an AC 14 and a +4, right? Because we're looking at a 4/4 creature, and a 4/4 base creature is +4 D10 AC 14. Hit dice isn't going to change, which is one of the ways in which it kind of like tampers power creep. Power creep is fine, whatever. Have really powerful creatures and let people run away and figure out how they need to deal with them, right? Like I really like this character because she only gets tough if you don't deal with her fast, and she might get out of hand really quickly, but that might mean that you aren't just sitting there pinging away at each other in a combat. It might mean that the players decide to do something different than just kind of trying to kill her, doing a like, we're gonna run away, we're gonna find her later when she's kind of cooled off, right? Like me as the GM would be like, great, so this is when she's actively in combat, and the second that's gone, the buffs are gone, and so maybe you do need to run away and find something to come back to later when she's weaker. Find a way to come back later when she's weaker. So that's cool. That's her. She is powerful all of a sudden. We also have these enchantments, which is also going to buff. Oh, I didn't even do all that. Trample and lifelink. Great. Lifelink is easy peasy. Lifelink is going to be the same as it is, right? Like per damage done. Damage done will be and trample, I was thinking would also be the same. I did write that. That's right. So it's kind of like cleave if you're a 3.5 person. But I think here it's going to be Now, this is rude. Damage extends to next closest character on overage. This character is becoming bananas strong. But that's fine. There's also ways that I could tamper this if I felt like I needed to, right? Like we could just remove this. You get +1/+1 on attack and just give it like a one time. Like you can, reduce these, reduce a buff. Like you have a one-time buff and you can take away from that to translate to damage, or we could just like ignore some of this if this became too many effects and we felt like it was going to be too much for the characters to handle. But that's also probably something I would do on the fly when running the game, is like, okay, these are all the effects, and like, is this getting too much so I'm not actually going to use this, or is it really good time to try and use this, because then she becomes a little bit like within range again, right? She becomes unpowered. This is rude because it requires killing or like dropping to 0 a player character, right? And if that happens, then there's like, that's what overage would read as, and then this might just keep buffing her forever. So I don't know, maybe we'll find out tonight. Maybe I'll try this tonight and we'll figure it out. But that's Caddy. Also, like, this is a treasure, right? This is totally a treasure. This is like might be a pretty standard. We might just do lifelink. Like you could also pick lifelink or trample and just make that an effect of it. I could do something like cleave needs to recharge again. We could use the equip cost as a recharge cost, which I think is probably a good idea. But I also think this is a good piece of equipment to give, even if it's just like a special hammer, right? Like it doesn't even need to be a unique hammer when it drops off the character. It could just be so you aren't like tracking that or giving them something weird, but like it could just be a cool, like a magical hammer, or a box of arrows that are hammers, because that's the context in which we're using it. So that's that. Probably not actually, but for the moment. So I have this druid. We're going to give this druid this Holy Avenger sword. Double strike. That's pretty cool. We love double strike. Double strike is just 2 attacks, right? So however it is that you are used to seeing that written. Holy sword +2/+2 d6 damage is how I would do that. So there's 2 attacks, get +2/+2, rad. Then we have these enchantments. Enchant player. Whenever enchanted player is attacked, you draw a card. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. Again, card draw. What do we do? What do we do with card draw? I think card draw does become... I think card draw is an optional rule of like, do you want to keep your cards up and active when you're running the dungeon, or do you want to just use the cards to help generate a dungeon, right? If you're using the cards to help generate a dungeon, then card draw doesn't have a huge lot of purpose, so it could just be a like, great, you're going to cycle that, you're going to take it out. Again, I didn't read all of these before I threw them in. I might have just taken out card draw. But if we were doing this while... if I was keeping this card around while running the dungeon, a thing like this would be like, great, so the enchanted player is me, the GM, or like the character, and it is like call to arms, right? Like this is when they want to, they can use this, or when it's attacked or whatever. They can do like cry out and see if they get something in that card draw. That might be another creature that shows up unexpectedly. It might be a piece of equipment that falls off the wall, or it might, whatever, right? Like whatever that shows up, it might be a strange spell effect all of a sudden. That again changes that, which is probably how I would use this. So this is something that I would like keep around, and then if I have leftover cards in my deck, I'm going to draw a card while I'm actually playing out this room in game. So we're gonna go with that, as opposed to the Eel Umbra, which is again just a like enchanted creature gets +1/+1. Because it says flash, this is something that you could, if you wanted to, make a spell effect, right? It's very easy to be like, it has flash, so like it doesn't need to be constantly active. It can be active at the beginning for sure, but it could also be something that gets activated by a character. For me, probably right now, just because we're trying to do something simple, I'm just going to buff the druid, right? The druid's a little iffy, so we're going to change that druid to a +3/+2. And this is looking like a pretty significant, like this is a room that I'm like, great, you've probably found the boss and they're hanging out, and that's what's in this room. Again, you don't have to generate rooms linearly, right? Like this maybe has become the boss room unintentionally, or you've found them in their quarters and you want to go elsewhere. It's not like that's not like your players need to go through these in the order that you generate them. And so maybe this is becoming, I don't know, they look like a cute couple. Maybe it's their jam. Maybe you found this rad lesbian couple that runs this dungeon and is probably going to murder your whole party. But maybe you've discover them in their office or whatever. Yeah, all the dungeon offices. We're going to do that +3/+1. And so this is cool. Gonna get tough. All of a sudden that druid, super tough. They're both super tough. This is a boss fight. I do not know if this is just going to generate constant boss fights, and if I am going to need to change from be a couple within your character level and just be one or on your character level, right? Like this would be a very different pull if I had only done 1 and 2, not 3 and below casting cost. If I had done 1 and 2, probably this, like, I mean, all of theirs. Oh, okay, so those 2 equipments, right? Like, which makes sense. That you can see that power level in effect. So those 2 equipments are 3. So if I was, you need to be within 1. If the general guideline was, you need to be within 1 level for casting costs, then these both would have been gone, and this would be a very different room. Let's do 1 more and see how this works. Absolutely not what? Absolutely not what? This fight? You don't want to have this fight? You're going to have this fight. Let's see if I roll. I also rolled a 6, right? That's as powerful as this room's ever going to get. This is the most powerful a room could be. I pulled a bunch of cards that were high level. This is, I might roll a 1 and get nothing. The next room might be empty. I didn't roll a 1, in fact. This is what happens to me when I GM all the time. Cool longbow. Let's get rid of that overlay so you can see all the cards. Ranker, classic. Imprisoned in the Moon. That's some cool flavor. We already have we have a theme. Colossal Hammer, great. We only have 1 creature. Great. Also, I love SRAM. This is gonna be great. Gonna be excellent. Okay, let's start with a creature. Easiest place to start. SRAM. We love SRAM. Whenever I cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle, draw a card. There's this. If I wanted to be a real butt, it would be like, great. So I know right now that I'm going to put this one and this one on SRAM, which is like the equivalent of casting them, right? There's also 2 other auras. So what I could read this is I'm going to draw 4 more cards for this room. This is becoming the actual boss room or whatever, which we could go with because technically my act of casting, technically it's all make-believe. But like in this parallel, my act of casting that is happening in the generating of the room, and therefore, that's when, if you wanted to like be faithful to those triggers, that's when those triggers would happen. But that's going to be probably too much. So let's see how SRAM ends up. Also, did I pull anything? Yeah, so one of these is overpowered with our new. I also would probably change their names and give them a little description of some variety. Still really easy to hit. This is the thing. It's like what this kind of is leaning towards is like things are kind of fragile, but really, really different and really unique and have a ton of abilities that they can pull, right? So the chances of like getting all of their uniqueness out is potentially limited, right? Like right now we're looking at 2d4, which could mean that you sneak up and kill them in one shot and you don't even see all this cool shit they're gonna have. Cool shit incoming. This attack, we're gonna figure out what that is when we see what that equipment is. +2 d6 AC 12. You could for sure just walk up. Wham. But look at this cool guy. Also, doesn't have to be a fight. SRAM's cool. SRAM could be a captive in a room that you heal and all of a sudden is on your team because I know that Caddy's going to be difficult, and so I'm going to give the players this NPC to help them out who's going to be stacked, right? Look at he's such a cool guy. Make him a friend. Can just be an NPC that has all this cool stuff. Maybe these... maybe this is a merchant. This is a traveling merchant. We're going Resident Evil styles. Oh, you're in the middle of a scary place full of danger? Here's a merchant. Would you like to shop? Perfect. Maybe these are things that he has on offer, right? Maybe these are unique items that you want to barter with or something, We're going to figure that out. But first, actually, I like that better. We're going to do the translation, but I like that better. We already know. We know this is Traveling Merchant. I'm just partial to SRAM because I put them in a lot of decks. So let's go with the enchantments first, because those are not treasure necessarily, right? Like if you're getting too many stacking abilities, then you can always just take the artifacts and make them a feature of the room, or make them a tool, or make them a piece of loot or something that isn't necessarily attached to buffing a creature. So we'll just start with this. +2/+0, trample. If the way I would read this, so +2/+0 is fine. That's great. We love a +2/+0 because that makes this a +4 D10. That feels more fitting for SRAM. That feels like it honors SRAM's authentic self better. It's hard, but it's a softie. The way that I would read when Rancor is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return Rancor to its owner's hand, is that if this character died, if I was putting this in battle, if this character died, their like death knell would buff another creature, right? That might be a player. That might be that the players, if this is an NPC that's aligning itself with the players and ends up dying in battle alongside them, a player's getting a +2 bonus, probably, for the rest of the fight. If this is an enemy, if this is a combatant, then this is getting, somebody else is getting this +2 effect. When obviously +2 on a creature translates to much more than +2 to like hit would for a character, but that's fine. That's fine. Balance is not important. Fun is. Okay, Rancor. Cool. I'm gonna make sure to make a note. Now, what do I think that? I think probably it's going to be this, right? Probably it's going to be a +2 to attack. Since it is a +2 to attack. Now I could read that as damage or to hit, but I'm just going to leave it there for now. And then we have Imprisoned in the Moon, which if that isn't a side quest prompt, I don't know what is, right? Like this character is literally going to be imprisoned in the moon. You have to save them. This is a puzzle room. Like we are getting somewhere with the flavor. Enchant creature, land, or planeswalker. Enchanted permanent is a colorless land with tap, add colorless mana, and loses all other card types and abilities. This is great. This is great. SRAM is trapped. This is giving me the room environment, right? Like this is telling me what this room is. This room is a puzzle. Maybe I have to go elsewhere to find some like resources for that. I was running some game and I grabbed a puzzle somewhere that is, maybe it was a module that I was running, but it's like it's a painting that you have to enter. And if that already is like cool, so there's maybe a literal, like there's maybe a painting, you have to like break the painting or you have to enter the painting to save the character, and there's some other world happening in there or something. I don't know, whatever. We're gonna think of, the puzzle I'm not putting on the internet because the players won't know it's that I haven't figured it out yet, but I will figure out what the puzzle is for this. But haven't figured out yet. Maybe that's just more literal, right? Like maybe it's the prison cells in Game of Thrones that are open because they're so high up that like you can't, I forget what they're called, but they're in one of the keeps, right? The whatever, the Sky Keep. And maybe this is a prisoner in Sky Keep who's on the edge. Like now we know we have that huge cavern, and the cavern kind of looks like the sky, and that kind of blends with where the ocean is. And maybe that means that this room actually is like up a series of stairs and a cutout of the wall of that original cavern that the characters came in. And so maybe when they're approaching from the water, they can actually just see this like lit circle cutout, and it looks kind of like the moon. And what that actually is just the cell that SRAM's hanging out in that needs to be saved from. I don't know. It's cool, right? The flavor. The flavor is cool. Will gift, conveniently, a cool hammer and a cool longbow. Why does it have a hammer and a longbow in there? Because that's the cool thing about those cells in particular, is that those cells, if you want to break out of, go nuts, you're just jumping off a cliff. This is too much. This is too much. I saw this card when I was writing up the rules for this and was like, +10/+10? It's far too much for a thing. But the way that I've kind of mitigated that kind of power is that if you have something that's an equip that expensive, that for sure becomes a recharge cost, right? Like, how do you get to equip 8? Well, great. You can use this once. If it's given to a player, I'm going to translate that obviously differently, right? Like the math on reading artifacts as loot has to be a little different because it's going to be adjusting it to whatever system I'm in. So if I'm in DCC, +10/+10 is huge, right? I probably actually would remove this card because this kind of tells me that it shouldn't be a 1-cost card. It should be an 8-cost card, which means the power of it is if we're doing the direct translation of like cost to level, this is like an 8th level party situation. I might be an 8th level party would find this hard, but might be able to actually handle a 12/12 creature or whatever. Probably not. It's going to be impossible. You get to the end of the dice stream. They do D20 for damage. It'll be great. But in the context of this, it's like, I know it's lower level, I know it's a little iffy, so I might just make it into this like really giant, cool hammer that has some kind of effect that buffs it, but that is really hard to access. So if we're just going like, recharge is always a D6. Anything over a 6 is going to be, you need to roll an exact 6. So this hammer is going to have some kind of buff effect where it does even like +D10 to damage, right? It's a huge amount of damage. But that's, sure, let's do that. So, giant hammer is going to be like, read as two-handed hammer, whatever that means in your system, with effect smack. Name these things more flavorful, or don't. How about the naming police? I'm zero kind of police. You should also be zero kind of police. Smack. Recharge. Yeah. 6. I don't actually want this to be. You don't need to see my formatting. Recharge 6. Oh man, we got there. Recharge 6 plus D10 damage. That's pretty cool. That's like it's probably a one-time per combat effect unless somebody's rolling really phenomenally. But that's treasure. It's cool. We like that treasure. Somebody saves Ram from the moon. Sorry, I just whacked my camera. Apologies. And then we have this longbow, and this creature deals 1 damage to any target. Oh, fun. Auto damage. Yeah. Equip 3. That's cool. Auto damage, I probably would do something like poison, like a bleed damage, right? Like it's automatically doing a thing. So, yeah, I'd probably just go like bleed 1 on hit creature and do a residual poison effect if I'm translating that to this kind of system. So also just like go the flavor way. Longbow, read his bow, bleed, residual 1 HP damage. Now, part of the reason that like I'm writing it like this is because this is kind of the system agnostic way to read it, right? So like residual 1 HP damage after successful hit. If you're in a system that has a mechanic for bleed, use that mechanic. If you're not, use literally this. Something that's been hit every round loses one. Maybe it's not every round. Maybe it's 6 rounds. Maybe it's some roll. Maybe you roll a d6 or a d20 or whatever. Maybe you roll a d3 because its equip cost is 3, and we will be playing DCC, so d3s exist. But there, we have 2 cool pieces of loot. We have a trapped NPC. We have some environmental effects, some narrative effects. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool like dungeon room. It looked like it was going to be kind of out of hand, but it actually did. Was like, this is super cool. This is fun because it also says like this character is not useful to the players, is not useful as an NPC until saved, right? That's how I'm going to read as a colorless land with loses its all its other card types, is like they are effectively non-existent until whatever that puzzle I come up with is, or they're saved in some other way. It's neat. I like it. And then the last thing, because again, we rolled 6, these are all complex, is this Ride the Avalanche, which we're in an interior cavern that looks like the sky. So I think an avalanche is a perfect thing to have happen. The next spell you cast this turn, when you cast this load, it has flash. When you cast your next spell this turn, put X +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature, where X is the mana value of that spell. So this is a weird one to interpret in context, right? Because we've already done all this narrative work. We've already decided this is an NPC. So like usually an instant would be something that either the character in the room or the room itself will have an effect of. So either the character can like literally cast the spell, which if the character was a spellcaster, it would be like, great, we're going to probably just translate it directly to 1, right? Like they're just going to get 1 +1/+1 counter when they cast their next spell. I think the way that I might read this, again, this is a long translation. This is me stretching it a little bit, but I might actually read this as like, when this character is freed, I might read this more narratively than mechanically, right? Like when this character is freed, they have a buff for a while. And instead of the action being like when you cast a spell, it's when an environmental trigger happens, which is them being freed, they are the target creature that gets a +1/+1, is probably how I would read that. And I would keep this card, like make a note of like, on death buffs. I might even make it so like when freed, it buffs the other character, right? Like this might just be like, we've kind of already decided that this is like a little bit of a support character that buffs. So like when freed, buffs +1/+1, which I would translate to like, great, so the character that frees this person gets both a damage buff and a toughness buff for like the rest of the dungeon, the rest of the day, maybe. It's cool. SRAM room, cool. I think we're getting somewhere flavor-wise. We have this, kind of like little intro battle that's probably going to be a little tricky, but is overcomable or avoidable, right? Like the definitely make all your combat avoidable. If it's going to be tough, give them lots of options. Maybe they can talk their way out of this. Who knows? This, to me, this druid caddy, very powerful lesbian relationship that probably is my evil baddie for this. For this dungeon, this is probably the center point because I just like it narratively. And then trapped is SRAM, who is for sure a himbo, and is going to help out in some way, shape, or form. Give the characters a bunch of buffs, which makes this a little bit easier to manage. Let's see if we do another room. If it gets if all the rooms seem like they're going to be like overpowered and mismanaged, then like this is going to be not mismanaged, but you know, this is going to be a thing that I will have to readjust some of my math on the system for. Let's do one more. Nope, I refuse. I refuse to roll. Nobody saw that. I didn't roll another 6. Much more reasonable. We're GMs, we fudge the rolls all the time. Everybody does it. It's never not true. I bumped that camera again. Apologies. Fleeceman's great. I love the Fleeceman. Wonderful. So I picked this deck because I knew it had a bunch of equipment in it, because I wanted there to be, like when I was just like running to the store to buy one, I was like, okay, this one probably has the most equipment and the most artifacts. And I want that because I think it's cool as a way to like add flavor and narrative to this dungeon. And so like I wanted to have a lot of those. And so like we're seeing a lot more here than I think probably a lot of decks have. But this is cool. This is going to be a cool combination. Sword of the Animus is a very cool card. It's not like, again, it's land draw, but I might just translate that into heal. If I'm using mana to heal, I might just, you know, use a land draw to heal. This is either a copy of this, or it is a piece of loot that can take the shape of a piece of equipment, right? It's either a magical item that can mimic other equipments, or it is like literally a mimic of this. So we have another equipment that it can copy, so it's really easy to just like translate it directly, but I actually think it's kind of more fun if I like drop this little, it can be a copy of any equipment on the battlefield. So I think this is like a little like magical sentient piece of clay or something, right? Like spirit that can shape itself to a piece of equipment that is visible elsewhere. Either that's like something the character already has or something they can see, but it would kind of always be the shape, because I think I really prefer those kinds of magic items. Like if I give you something that can mimic the shape of other things, what are you going to do with it? Probably you're not going to mimic, it doesn't become a +5 flaming sword of whatever. It becomes like a sword that probably is not even flaming, right? Like I would make this like, this is a narrative reward more than a super powerful weapon. But I like that a lot, so I'm probably going to go with that as a tool. If I wanted to just be simpler, I could be like, there are 2 of these. And both of those could be cool +1/+1 swords, because that's probably what this is. It's probably just a straight +1/+1 sword that you heal 1 point of damage, 1 hit point of damage on every successful hit. That is how I'm going to translate that. And it could just be that the Fleecemane Lion is double wielding 2 cool swords that you get when they drop them, because that's fun. Who doesn't love that? But I kind of like the idea of taking this and going a little bit, right? The crucible yields what you have forged in your mind. You need only reach in and draw the masterwork forth. Cool. Let's go with the flavor text. Great. Rad. Lion. The lion, however, is probably guarding the equipment. I think monstrosity is a really great mechanic for translating into a dungeon monster. So the lion is going to have a d6 for hit points. This is a totally reasonable. It's not totally reasonable. It's going to hit really hard, but it's a totally reasonable bad dude, right? So it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough guy, but that's okay. D6, probably we'll go with a claw effect. paw is going to be +3 E468. AC 13, and once per day, right? Everybody loves a once per day. Once per day. Probably should write this the other way. This is like its little effect. Once per day, add +1, +1. And it gains, add +1, +1. I don't even know if the +1 is that important. Become monstrance once per day, add +1, +1. Gain hexproof and indestructible, and hexproof and indestructible is spell and damage resistance, if I remember correctly. So it's like a tough little dude. Hexproof, spell resistance, indestructible, damage resistance, whatever that means in your system. So become monsters once per day as +1, +1, spell and damage resistance for a period of time is probably the best way to relate this, right? Like it's not just like all day. It's even like a round would be not bad, right? Like a singular round, it just becomes big and super hard to cut for one round. I mean, the timing on that could be anything you want. I think because we're in low level, one round is like, this is a cool thing that we could actually make it a recharge effect, right? We could go not do once per day. We could go recharge 5, which is going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get on a D6, unless you're me and you just roll 6 all the time, apparently. Add +1, +1 spell and damage resistance for one round. So spell and damage resistance are kind of interesting because like they can be really powerful, but when you're dealing with like low, like damage resistance for sure, powerful, half damage, but it's only gonna have 3 hit points. So if everybody gets a whack and it's gonna be dead before that even happens. But like it could save it for 2 rounds, and that could mean that this becomes quite big, right? Because we're gonna get a +4 D10 again, and then we're gonna have an AC of 14. That's like it's a big guy, but it is protecting these 2 things. Do I give the lion a sword? I mean, I could give the lion a sword, or I could just make 2 pieces of loot. Replicator. Yeah, it's a 3D printer. It's not a 3D printer. Forms to shape of object. Takes time to change shape. Now, I tend to run things like this kind of loose rules works fine. So it takes time, just means like you're not in the middle of battle. You can change this again to whatever you want, but like it takes time to change shape. It's not going to happen instantly. So like, you know, if you're in a room and you want to plan, this is a planning tool. That is my way of indicating that this is not a super cool combat tool. And then we have this cool sword, which is like glow sword. Glow sword, +1. Bam. Glow sword. Who doesn't love a glow sword? this is cool loot in this room. We have a cool baddie. This is actually like a totally reasonable room, right? I think probably they won't instantly die. So that's like the first 4 rooms of a dungeon. I could keep going. I probably will, but I probably won't keep streaming because I got to keep some secrets from the players this evening. But that's kind of how it works. So the tool itself is currently visible online. It exists. There's a link in that down there, should be down on the page. Let's see, I can just do this, can't I? This is kind of the tool in its current form. It kind of walks you through what you can do, how to build out a dungeon deck, a general guideline for like casting costs of your cards, and then walking through the steps that we've been going through in this with some like reminder tools, and how to translate everything from data point to data point. And then we have our little example here with a little bit of like, this is how I would use this. Instant sorceries, artifacts, enchantments, and then a not complete list of I've done something weird. A not totally complete list of abilities that can be used. I'm going to keep adding to the abilities list, but there's some of them. There's the kind of evergreen abilities that are in there, except for destroy, which I'm going to go in and write because I figured that out on the old stream. But yeah, it's up there. There's a link available. Use it. Message me. I want to see people use it. I think that would be cool. I might run a bit of a jam so that and I'm going to share some of the dungeons that I make with it as like playable dungeons for other people. But I would really like to see other people make some cool dungeons with it, with all kinds of different magic decks. Thanks everyone. I'm going to make a spooky lesbian dungeon. Who doesn't love a spooky lesbian dungeon?